Today I will touch upon two important instances of regional politics in India. On earlier occasions, we examined the trajectories of regional politics with reference to South India, the Northeast, and Punjab. Now we may take up two more instances of regional politics with reference to Jammu and Kashmir and also Jharkhand. Politics of Jammu and Kashmir is interestingly bound up with global politics. It happened primarily due to partition of India at the time of independence, the creation of Pakistan, which as the neighboring state in fact was much more interested in nibbling into Kashmir because of its geographical proximity to Pakistan, and also due to some administrative prevarications on the part of the then ruler of this particular region, the Hindu king Hari Singh, who on independence was hesitating to take a decision as far as his abdication was concerned. Finally, he decided to accede to India, but the time that was lost in the process could be taken advantage of by Pakistan, which consolidated its armed forces around the region in order to make serious attempts at destabilizing Kashmir. On India's part, it had the support of Sheikh Abdullah, who was the leader of the National Conference, which in fact was a secular political outfit breaking away from the Muslim Conference in 1931 and more or less taking a political stand that would be closer to the Indian National Congress. It would have been in the fitness of things for the Indian rulers of the time to take Sheikh Abdullah into confidence and endow him with the responsibility to democratically administer Jammu and Kashmir on the basis of the popular support that he would be in a position to command. Because as we all know, Kashmir in fact was predominantly a Muslim state with the Muslim population amounting to as much as 80%. But it would not be correct to presume that the Muslim population was absolutely homogeneous. They were divided into the Shias, the Sunnis and also the Sufis, who would represent a totally different religious sect given much more to the culture of religious harmony and religious syncretism. Jammu was predominantly Hindu and Ladakh in fact had a Buddhist population. So in a sense, Jammu and Kashmir was not to be looked upon as culturally any different from most other parts of the Indian nation. It also in fact had all sorts of diversities in terms of the composition of its population, their language, their religion. Not all the Kashmiri people in fact would be speaking Urdu. They had their own language. They also were divided into a number of religious sects. But the political atmosphere was primarily destabilized by the intrusion of external forces, primarily by Pakistan, which was keen on grabbing whichever parts of Jammu and Kashmir it could lay hands on, and also because of its ability to take the Kashmir issue to the global plane. Nehru initially promised to sort of organize a plebiscite to ascertain the views of the Kashmiri people about where they would like to express their loyalties to India or to Pakistan, but he afterwards decided against it, as he was quite annoyed with too much of nibbling made by the global powers into the Kashmir affairs, which the government of India tried to firmly assert to be a matter of the Indian nation state alone, not to be decided by any external agency. Now, in such a situation, after Sheikh Abdullah took up the reins of power in the region with the new constitution that was prepared for Jammu and Kashmir, giving some special powers to the people of Kashmir, also giving them some additional protection of their regional autonomy, which was not liked by some but not challenged by many at the time of the introduction of the Constitution of India, but it remained a bone of contention for the future. But after Sheikh Abdullah started ruling the region, he also was taking some liberty to negotiate the problems of Kashmir with diplomats, with some foreign correspondents, things which in fact were not much to the liking of the then government of India. As a result, the government decided to put Sheikh Abdullah behind bars, imposed president's rule, and also permanently installed the Indian army to maintain not only sort of external security but also internal peace and security. The army therefore in fact had an opportunity to intervene on a large scale even into the domestic spheres of social and political life of the people of Kashmir, a fact in fact which remained a sore point in the life of the Kashmiri people for all time to come. But this could not be changed by the government of India out of fear that any relaxation on its part might sort of expose Kashmir to foreign intrusion, to the intrusion of some terrorist outfits who would be trained in Pakistan and put into the region to destabilize peace in the area. Now, from then on, the people of Kashmir in fact witnessed a very interesting situation in which their own interests and aspirations were not taken much into consideration. Either their demands were sort of equated with the demands of various terrorist groups. They were looked upon with suspicion, were often sort of made the victims of some kind of repression by the state army, or they were not allowed to develop their indigenous ways of life beyond a certain point, because there were restrictions all around. Now, the situation could be resolved to some extent by the continuation of the democratic process in the region and the coming together of the Indian National Congress and the National Conference from time to time in ruling Kashmir through coalition politics, or alternately there will be occasions when either the National Conference or the Indian National Congress in fact would be holding the reins of power, but they would try together to sort of bring about a secular atmosphere in the life of Kashmir. This was increasingly destabilized over the years as Kashmir in fact became an area to be forayed into by Pakistan on one pretext or the other, and also the interest shown by small segments of the Kashmiri Muslims belonging to the Hizbul Mujahideens or some fractions of the Hurriyats, who in fact would insist on taking each and every issue pertaining to the life of Kashmir to the international forum, or would like Pakistan to be made a party into all such negotiations. That is, in any negotiation between the people of Kashmir and the government of India, they would in fact insist on inviting the participation of Pakistan. This is something that would sort of tail up the normal peace process in Kashmir. From time to time, Kashmir was under attack from various terrorist outfits. They were supported by external forces with arms, ammunitions, and also given training from time to time. Pakistan managed to usurp a part of the Kashmir through indulgence in border skirmishes from time to time. Now, of late, the situation in fact has shown sign of a change in view of the fact that the Bharatiya Janata Party, which is supposed to be a staunch proponent of the ideology of Hindutva, and a fraction of the regional political outfit of Kashmir known as the PDP, that is the People's Democratic Party, in fact managed to forge an understanding between them, and a coalition government in fact came up in 2015 after the sudden demise of Mufti Muhammad Shoaid, who was the leader of the PDP and who in fact became the first chief minister of the coalition after it took over the reins of power in Kashmir. His daughter Mehbooba Mufti is now sort of the new leader, and the deputy chief minister happens to be from the Bharatiya Janata Party, Nirmal Singh, who is also representing a constituency from Jammu. So, for the time being, a patchwork has been made between the two regions of Kashmir representing two distinct communities, but much of the happenings in Kashmir in fact can be attributed not to the internal ethos of politics but to the intrusion of various external forces. Given to them, people of Kashmir in fact are peace loving. They would like to sort of have good trade and business relationship with the remaining parts of the country, which would be benefiting them economically, socially, and who would also be looking forward to more and more safeguards provided to their democratic rights by the Indian nation state. Whether this can now sort of take off under the new political dispensation remains to be seen. Jharkhand, as we all know, in fact came up as a separate state in 2000 AD, in fact cut off from Bihar although the initial impetus for the Jharkhand movement comprised a number of other regions of the country, including parts of Odisha, parts of Madhya Pradesh, parts of Bengal, and of course parts of Bihar. Ultimately, the state that took shape in 2000 was cut off from Bihar, comprising several districts, which in fact were primarily identified as areas inhabited predominantly by the forest dwellers. That is what the term Jharkhand basically stands for. It is the land of the forest dwellers. Now, the forest dwelling tribal people of the plains of India had been in fact the subject of considerable amount of socio-economic exploitation through ages, right from the colonial days. They in fact were exploited by outsiders who would encroach upon their land, who would encroach upon the forest produce, who would also lay their hands on the huge amount of mineral resources that in fact laid underground in most of these regions. And there would be movements of opposition and resistance raised by the indigenous tribal communities of these regions. The Sautals, the Mundas, the Oraos, the Gonds, in fact would be some of the major tribal communities inhabiting the forest lands in the plains of the country. Now, they rose in revolt from time to time. In 19th century, there were two very important revolts of the tribal people, one known as the Sautal Revolt of 1855-1856, the other the revolution by the Mundas in 1900. The tribal people in fact demanded their rights over forest lands. They wanted to have opportunities of education and employment in the areas inhabited by them. They wanted industries to be set up in those areas inhabited by them, which would accommodate more and more indigenous people rather than taking outsiders into those. But the development trajectory of post-independence Indian state showed that they were at the receiving end of the development process. As someone commented, dams drown them, industries displace them, and deforestation starves them. This was in fact the scenario in which the tribal people found themselves. And it was quite natural that they would sort of raise their voice against this kind of inhuman exploitation and repression. Now, politically speaking, the initial response of the post-independence Indian state was to accommodate a section of the tribal elites within the fold of mainstream politics. The Indian National Congress, which in fact ruled the country uninterruptedly for more than 3 decades, took the initiative in winning over a section of the tribal elites to their side. They put them into central cabinet or in state cabinet, offered them some concessions, gave them some portfolios, and thereby tried to take away the heat of these movements. But beyond a certain point, this strategy did not work. As more and more grievances grew amongst the people, as they in fact entered into various kind of militant political movements, and from the late 1960s, many of them in fact joined the Maoist outfits. The Maoist movement in fact was a development from the late 1960s, and they tried to mobilize a huge chunk of the tribal people into these movements. Now, therefore, in Bihar, in Andhra Pradesh, in Madhya Pradesh, in Odisha, a large number of Maoist groups in fact came up, and they attracted a large number of the tribal people. To offset this process of growing militancy on the part of various tribal communities, the state finally decided to offer separate statehood to the people of Jharkhand. But the creation of a new state of Jharkhand did not sort of bring about any sort of remarkable change in the overall scenario. Many of their problems, in fact, would remain unattended to. The resources that they needed for their overall development were not forthcoming, and they were also not allowed to make use of their own indigenous resources for their own development. That sort of a situation did not come up, although a separate state for the people of Jharkhand was created in the year 2000 AD. Now, therefore, the demand for autonomy on the part of people who are sort of lacking in terms of resources required for their advancement in socio-economic and also cultural terms. The demand for preservation of their own culture, which is a very important part of the demand for a separate state, which is in fact part of the demand for autonomy, is not given the attention that it deserved. In fact, India has only 22 official languages, but as we know, there are many other languages which are sufficiently developed, which are also rich in terms of literary and cultural content. Language like Maithili, for instance, in fact, are not given the attention that they deserve. These languages have not yet been incorporated into the constitution of the country. There are many communities who do not have their own mother tongue recognized as an official language in India. There are also many socio-economic disabilities suffered by people belonging to different regions of the country, which still remain unattended to. Now, as a result, there will always be sort of enough materials for people to sort of rise up in demand of more and more autonomy, more and more share of the resources that rightfully belongs to them. But at the same time, it has got to be noticed that what is remarkable about the Indian body politic is the enormous capacity of the people of so much of diversities to remain firmly united and integrated as part of the Indian nation state, or nation state if you would like to call it, as India comprises so many distinct nationalist groups. Now, according to the survey made by the Anthropological Survey of India, we have in India no less than 4,635 distinct communities, and all people of this country, in fact, are in a sense belonging to a minority community, and they are also by nature migrants. So, India is basically a land of minorities and migrants. No particular community can really claim to be numerically a majority as far as the socio-cultural makeup of the Indian nation is concerned. So, it is futile to look for a homogenizing idiom for creating a nation. The nation in the Indian context, in fact, remains a conglomeration of so many regions vying for their autonomous expressions. And the more such autonomy be granted to them, the more will be the flowering of the Indian nation. This is how the issue of regional politics has got to be viewed in India. It should not be immediately sort of conceived of as a threat or a challenge to the security, the sovereignty and integrity of India. Rather, a more flexible constitutional arrangement that would seek to accommodate the diverse interests of so many different groups without letting any of them feel that they are being neglected would be the ideal way to ensure smooth running of the Indian nation state in its democratic form. So I think this is how we have to address the question of regional politics in India.